So Shabbat Shalom, guys. Let's begin.
Shabbat Shalom.
And thank God for the gift of learning Torah together.
Baruch atah Adonai
Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu
b'mitzvotav
v'tzivanu
לעשות
לעשות
דברי
דברי
תורה.
תורה.
בערב נא אדוני אלוהינו את דברי תורתך
בפינו
בפינו
ובפי עמך בית ישראל, ונהיה אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בית ישראל, כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה. ברוך אתה אדוני המלמד תורה לעמו ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים ונתן לנו את תורתו. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Shabbat Shalom, colleagues.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom, dear friends who are participating virtually. So excited for this conversation about the prophet Micah. What I want to do is just kind of frame Micah, contextualize Micah, and then dig right into the verse that he is most famous for, Micah 6:8. This is probably one of the most famous verses in all of the Tanakh. And I want to ask you what he's saying, what he means when he says it, and what it means to us when he says it. So Micah lives in the 8th century BCE. He's one of the earlier prophets. He's a contemporary of Amos and Hosea. And Micah is a double doom guy. He says that the northern kingdom is going to fall, and he's right. And he says the southern kingdom is going to fall, and he's right. And if you look at the Heschel pieces that I put in the attachment, as well as the Michael Fishbane piece, his basic critique is not unlike that of Amos, which is corruption, not ethical, not caring, not decent. The rich get richer, the poor are unseen. The power structure lets that happen and benefits from it. So it's a very, his basic critique is one of ethics, ethical insufficiency in ancient Israel, both in the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and his basic message is because of your inability to be decent mensches, both countries, both parts of ancient Israel are going to fall, and of course, he's right. Now that's in the earlier chapters of Micah. We pick up, Micah has one whole chapter that's a haftarah for Parshat Balak, and then there's another part that we're not going to look at today that is included some verses at the end of Shabbat Shuvah, and also a little bit of him at the end of Jonah on Yom Kippur, as you know. But the main haftarah is for Balak, and here we pick up with the restoration. So we've been kicked out of the north, we've been kicked out of the south, and Micah in this chapter says, but there's going to be a restoration. God is going to take you back, and you're going to have a new community in Israel. And if you look at the whole chapter, it's very interesting. He has a couple of analogies. We're kind of like dew, we're lovely as dew. It's lovely as dew, gentle, lovely as dew. And in the same thing that this remnant is also fierce as a lion. It's gentle as a dew, it's fierce as a lion. We come back, and now there needs to be an accounting. And Micah does a move that's a kind of a reversal of what 20th century Jews did in the Holocaust, which is 20th century Jews put God on trial. We said, here we are in the camps, God, you're on trial. And of course, these are famous stories, and they always end in two ways. One, with a conviction, God is guilty. And two is, we have to end the trial now, it's time to daven mincha. It's time to daven Mara. Right? So they try God, convict God, and then daven to God. That's the classic Holocaust motif. In this story, in this chapter, Micah reverses it. Of course, he's before the Holocaust, obviously, but he reverses the tension in the story. God puts the Jewish people on trial. I, God, took you out of Egypt. I sustained you through the wilderness. I've loved you. I gave you my teachings, and you've not been living up to them. Then here's the context for his famous teaching. Micah then says that the Jewish people say to God, God, you're right. We are guilty as charged in this litigation you're bringing against us. We want to be really good Jews. We want to be good Jews, and you're giving us another chance. How precious is a second chance? This is the restoration. So God, what can we do for you? This is the context of his famous passage. What can I do? So take a look on page 5 of the handout. because this is the contrast that is going to allow you to understand Micah. Okay? So the people now are just, God, we are eager beavers. It's like the first day of school with a shiny apple. We want to be the best possible people we can be. With what shall I approach the Lord? Do homage to God on high? Shall I approach him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Would the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with myriads of streams of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for my sins? Answer, no. He has told you, O man, what is good, and what the Lord requires of you. Only, to do justice, and to love goodness, and to walk modestly with your God. Okay? Higid lecha adam ma tov u'ma Adonai daresh mimcha. Ki im, translated here as only. Asot mishpat, do justice. Ahavat chesed, love kindness, love mercy, love goodness, loving kindness. V'atznei lechet im Elohecha, walk humbly, walk modestly with your God. Okay? Emphasis on only, right? I don't want your sacrifices. I definitely don't want any sacrifices of firstborns. And I don't even want your rams and all the animals. Just justice, mercy, humility. That's it. Okay. Now, here's my question. What does Micah think, if this is your Torah, what does Micah have to say about kashrut? Does Micah care? You're at Legal Seafoods on the day that it's going to open. And you'd love lobster. But you know lobster's treif. Do you have to order the salmon, or can you go for the lobster? According to Micah, so long as you do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. First, let's understand Micah in his own context. What is he saying about the ritual side of Judaism? Colleague? Dan?
Well, I want to just start with, taking apart the Hebrew a little bit, because the translation only is key, but that's not the only way that we can translate that. Ki'im is idiomatic for therefore, so it doesn't necessarily mean this is the only thing. This means that it's a part of what should be done. So by taking the statement as saying this is that we should do this and not, let's say if this is and as opposed to one or the other. So that's sort of one way of sort of beginning the approach of understanding the Hebrew. That's not really answering your question, but I think it's something valid that we should acknowledge.
Let me ask this question, Dan. And, I mean, you can try to parse the Hebrew and do grammatical nicety. But if you say to me, I just want to please you. Tell me what I can do to please you. And I say, Dan, here's what you can do to please me. A, B, C. Okay. What does that say about D, E, and F? When I say to you A, B, C, that's it. That's the ballgame. A, B, C.
So you are God.
No, I'm just trying to interpret Micah. I'm just a rabbi trying to understand this. Yeah. When he says A, B, C, what does it mean about D, E, and F? And in other words, is Micah, look, we all know, let's bring Micah down to our world here. We have a congregation full of people who don't keep kosher. 85% of conservative Jews, according to the last study I saw, self-report as not keeping kosher. That's just our people. Those are the folks who are watching, don't keep kosher. The vast majority, according to all the statistics that the seminary gave, 85% don't keep kosher. And as we'll talk about the Kushner piece later, but most of our people don't keep Shabbos in any kind of traditional way. Most of our people don't pray every day, etc. But what's important to our people is doing justice, loving mercy, and walking modestly with your God. Is Micah the patron saint, the prophet, for a kind of Judaism that emphasizes ethics and says ritual is just not that important? To be honest with you, it's just not that important. Elisa?
I think for me it feels really important to understand him in his context, because he's speaking out against the injustices that he sees around him. He's speaking out against what he sees as people who are focusing on the wrong priorities, and I think he's a little hyperbolic in his saying that this is all that matters. I can't imagine that in his own time he would advocate throwing out everything that people are doing. He's, I think, saying instead, refocus yourselves. Don't think that you can do these things and then not, you know, don't think you can offer your sacrifice and then be stingy and that's going to be okay. This is what God really cares about, but that doesn't mean that God doesn't also care about other things.
Right. Do note, by the way, that this is a prophetic motif. I mean, we saw this also in Amos. We chanted on Yom Kippur with Isaiah, which is, don't give me your rituals unless you're a,
Right.
you're a man.
So that's the important
That's
part
the
here.
unless, yeah.
Yes.
The unless,
Unless.
right? It's not that they are saying don't keep kosher. It's saying that is fine. But
Right.
the important stuff here is not, I mean, it is that, but that's not enough.
Right.
Do justice, do loving kindness.
Michelle, before we get to Kushner and halacha and the ritual side and what its relation is to the ethical side, what are some of your preliminary thoughts on Micah, on this particular passage?
It's glorious. It's really powerful. It's really inspiring. And I think the key word is the unless that's in there. The ritual system is meant to bring us higher. And the challenge that we face is when so many people think the ritual deeds that we do are enough in and of themselves. They're meant to move us somewhere. And the problems happen when we say, oh, I'm not eating the lobster, therefore I've done all the work I have to do. And I think that's what Micah's pointing out, is that the not eating lobster means that you are an Eved Hashem, that you are part of a system. And that system demands love and compassion and a refinement of your spirit that's critical.
So here's what I hear in what you're saying, Michelle, that the rituals, that the core is this, doing justice, loving goodness, walking modestly with God, and the rituals help us get there. The rituals deepen our sensitivities and motivate us to do that. And so here's the time to bring in the wonderful turn of phrase of Abraham Joshua Heschel, which is there's right and right, R-I-G-H-T, and right, R-I-T-E, and that they're inextricably interwoven. And the purpose of right, R-I-T-E, is to inspire us to do right, R-I-G-H-T. And if you only have right, R-I-G-H-T, without right, R-I-T-E, it's evanescent. How do you transmit it? And if you only have right, R-I-T-E, without mental type, R-I-G-H-T, then it's empty. But if you have both of them together, that's a potent way to live.
Yes, so there is something in this line that we just read that always strikes me, because, and now I think even more about this because of the fabulous Kushner article that you asked us to read. By the way, I read Kushner all my life, always in Spanish, and that is the only reason I understand what he says in English, because I read it earlier in Spanish. Anyways, but one thing that strikes me is that the prophet here is not saying Eloheinu at the end. It's saying Elohecha. So your God. What does it mean? And I'm only tying this to Kushner because Kushner talks about my own beliefs in the age of democracy, you know.
Right.
And you know, why doesn't it say Eloheinu, our God? It says Elohecha, your God, the God that speaks to you.
So I think it's a wonderful pivot to Kushner and the question of each of us taking ownership of our relationship with God. I want to ask you 4 questions. Permit me to be a little bit... permit me to be a little bit controlling, because I've been thinking a little bit about how to bring this in. I want to ask you 4 questions and do a wraparound. And I've shared with my colleagues what the questions are, but for those who are learning at home, here's the first question. So Kushner, let me, before I do that, Kushner, if for those of you who might not have read it, I think the Kushner piece was actually framed by Arnie Eisen, when Arnie Eisen became chancellor, as one of the pivotal thought pieces in modern American Judaism. And Arnie Eisen's on record as saying if he were to have to do an anthology of most important thought pieces in the history of the Jewish story, this Kushner book would be right up there early on. So what does Kushner say? Kushner is a full-on assault on the way conservative Judaism had seen itself for the inception of conservative Judaism, which was conservative Judaism always argued that we are a halachic movement, meaning that we are bound by Jewish law. So why do I have to eat the lobster, not the lobster, the salmon or the tuna over the lobster? Because I'm halachic. I'm obligated. I'm commanded by God to not eat lobster. Lobster is a forbidden food, and I am halachic. I do what God says. I'm commanded. I take those commands seriously. I'm halachic. That was conservative movement, and conservative movement would say, in fact, not only are we halachic, but we are the most pure and accurate form of halakha, because the rabbis of the Talmud were basically conservative Jews. Because what's halakha mean? Halakha means you take tradition and you marry it with change, and you come up with a halachic response, something like how do the texts interface with the context of your life? And that's halakha, that interface of text and context. The original halachic people were rabbis of the Talmud. We are their inheritors. We are halachic, but in the end, we are bound by this system. And that's how the conservative movement saw itself, and that's how I was definitely trained from 93 to 97. You are a halachic person, you are a halachic rabbi, you're going to a halachic congregation, and your job is to preach halakha. Just as an example of that, we were trained that, in New England, in the winter, Shabbos comes in at 4 o'clock. What do you do if a congregant wants to light candles when they sit down to eat dinner at night after it's already dark? You have to educate them that can't do it, because lo tavaru eish b'chol moshvatechem. You have to educate them, light candles before 4 o'clock. Once you light candles after 4 o'clock, you're lighting on Shabbos. It's a violation of Shabbos rules. Halacha. Okay. Kushner comes in 2007 and says there is a fundamental unwellness at the heart of the conservative movement, which is the conservative movement sees itself as halachic, and that's not true. We're not. We think we're bound by halakha, but the truth is our laity are definitely not bound by halakha. Most conservative rabbis are not actually bound by halakha. So, and then what he does is he offers up a whole new mode of trying to understand why would I eat the tuna instead of the lobster. It's not because I'm commanded, and it's not because I'm halachic. We're not a halachic movement. Okay. That was his piece in 2007. So, with that as background, here's the 4 questions for my colleagues. Number 1, do you see yourselves as halachic, yes or no? Number 2, and then it's going to go around. Number 2, what's your definition of halakha? When you say that you are or are not halachic, what's your definition of that? Okay. Number 3, and here's where the rubber hits the road, does your sense of halakha, of Jewish law, ever require you to do something that you don't want to do? Or does your sense of halakha prohibit you or prevent you from doing something you really want to do? Right? You do something you don't want to do, or you don't do something you do want to do because of Jewish law? And if so, what is it? Give us an example where Jewish law really comes in and shapes how you act in ways that are contrary to what you would actually like to do. So,
what happens if we start and we forget the questions?
Okay, so here's don't worry, I'm going to prompt you. First question, yes or no, are you halachic? Dan?
Okay, so I just want to take a quick step back, because I just wanted to answer your right and right very quickly.
Yeah.
I was thinking about what you teach with tefillin, about right and right. We do the ritual, but the ritual promulgates the purpose, which is head, heart, and hand. So I was thinking about that just now.
So yes or
yes.
no, are you halachic?
Yes, I am.
Elisa, are you halachic?
You are not allowing us to say why.
No.
That's next.
Oh, that's the next.
This is the part where I'm very controlling. This is the part where I'm very controlling. Elisa, are you halachic, yes or no?
Yes.
Michelle, are you halachic, yes or no?
I used to be.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good answer.
No.
Okay, and I'm not. Definitely not halachic. Okay. Dan, you say you are halachic. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so I'm halachic because I follow the rules of kashrut, right? But again, following as you were taught the rules of kashrut through the conservative movement. I will go out to a non-kosher restaurant and I'll eat those things which are okay. I will not eat the lobster. I will eat the salmon. I will eat the dairy. I won't eat the meat, that kind of thing.
Tuna is better.
Okay, yes, it depends where you go. I observe Shabbat. And I'll go back to that later. I observe Shabbat.
And just so as I understand your answer, you do all that you do
Yes.
because you see yourself as commanded by Jewish law.
Yes,
Okay.
I do that. I'm one of those rarities.
Okay. Eliza Berger, you said that you are halachic. What did you mean by that?
Conservative movement, please.
What do I mean by that? For me, halacha is a system of how you do things, and it's not a logical thing. It's an ongoing conversation with Jewish tradition. I feel like I live my life in an ongoing conversation with Jewish tradition and make choices that sometimes don't even make, like, the places that I feel called to do things that make no sense. Excuse me one moment.
Brian, you're on. Brian.
Speaking
Brian,
of
you're
halakha,
coming through our monitor like the Kodesh Baruch Hu from
I thought it was the
above.
conservative movement police asking us why we are not halachic.
Excuse us for technical difficulties.
Brian! There you go.
There's halakha.
Shabbat Unplugged. That's a famous Shabbat Unplugged.
A QED. QED, by the way, I didn't plan that, but just one small example, we ain't halacha. And I think class is over, we'll see you next Shabbos.
But can I just make a case for, like...
Let's celebrate the bar mitzvah.
Just like, this is what they call in the Gemara before Hesya. Like on Shabbos morning, in the middle of the chapel, for the entire audience to see, you come in and desecrate the Sabbath with a smile. And we're laughing about it. That means that whatever we are, it's not halacha like we used to think about it. But you were saying.
But I was saying, I think that there's a way to be, the rabbis always defined the way that they observed. Their way of being Jewish was different than the Judaism that was outlined in the Torah. And radically so in some cases. Radically so, they read against the grain. And one of the things that's happened in the course of Jewish tradition is we have become adherents to the belief that older is better, and that the rabbis, because they were closer to Sinai, had a better sense of what halakha should be and a better ability to interpret the text. I don't hold by that, but I do believe strongly that my life should be in conversation with Jewish texts and in Jewish tradition, and that I'm very committed to Shabbos. I'm very committed to a diet that honors God. I'm very committed to living in a way that honors the traditions. And I'm also committed to actively reinterpreting that.
Well, I will be very interested to hear round 3, whether your continuing dialogue ever causes you to act contrary to the way you would like to act. Michelle, your answer was so fascinating. Are you halachic? You used to be.
I love Eliza's answer, and I wish so much that it could be mine.
B-U-T.
But right, it would actually be tremendously helpful to me, because I would like to see myself as halachic. But to me, halakha means a standard that has been kept by our people historically and is kept today. Like, if I walk in any synagogue anywhere in the world, would I be considered halachic? And to me, there were many, many years of my life where I felt like I was aspiring to that goal, and I was fulfilling it, and there were many things that I did not want to do, because I saw myself as bound by a worship that the Kodesh Baruch Hu gave us, and is not something that I decide. Deborah Newman Kamen, Rabbi Deborah Newman Kamen, has this very famous moment where she said that that conservative rabbis are called upon as we go into our congregation to either struggle against our communities and where they are, or to go native. And by going native, she meant, can you observe in the way that your community observes, which is actually in and of itself a halakhic concept. Do the thing that the place where you are does. And in recent years, I've found a lot of beauty in being able to observe in a similar way to the way that our community observes, and to take on rituals and practices that our community has innovated, many of which are not halachic. I have a few sticklers that are like my appendix, that vestigial part of my anatomy, that are these halachic positions that are challenging to let go of without losing myself. But mostly I feel like I've found my way to a place of comfort with Micha's voice.
In other words, if I hear what you're saying, Michelle, going native, that is to say, your practice now kind of melds with our practice here at Temple Emmanuel, with the communities. You're not the super duper religious person always castigating us for not being religious enough. You've kind of merged with us. But by going native, that costs you your halachic status. Okay, good. Honest, thank you. Elias, you say that you're not halachic. What do you mean?
I say I'm not halachic, and none of you are halachic either, although you want to say something different. I love this article of Kushner, and he says something that really speaks to me, which is being observant, not necessarily being halachic. I'm observant, I'm not halachic. Why? To me, halakha is a set of rules that bind us to a movement in a way. I feel like halakha, the one halakha that would speak to me is halakha in the conservative movement. As Kushner also said, we allow, by the halakha, we allow women to daven and to be fully part of services. We are allowed to eat in non-kosher restaurants, eating food that is not prohibited. So, but I'm not halachic. I don't put on tefillin every day. I have to be honest, I try to come every day to shul. Sometimes I'm not. Saturday, Friday nights, we have Shabbat Alive. Shabbat Alive always starts at 6:30, even when it's not Shabbat. We do sometimes outdoor Shabbat Alive, and it's not even dark, and we have done already with it. I don't bench, Birkat Hamazon every time I eat. I'm not halachic. So halakha means to me applying and living the rules that were set by a movement that we are bound to. And I'm not. I'm observant. I try to do the best I can, as a Jew, and do the best, yes. But also there is something else with us, which is a problem, which is what you mentioned, that we work here. And sometimes we bend the rules based on the needs of the congregation. It's halakha to live stream services or to do Zoom when there is no minyan. Well, the conservative movement just passed it yesterday. And we've been doing it for 2 months. So did we follow halakha? No, we didn't follow halakha.
Right.
All right?
No, we created the halakha.
So
if halakha, let me finish with this. If halakha is to do 100% what it says in the Jewish law of the conservative movement, I'm not.
Okay. So let me just say, I'm not halachic and I'm anti-halacha in the following sense. I want the locus of decision making on what I do to be me, and to be us, and to be our community. And I don't want to do something because somebody else tells me to do it. That it's permitted because somebody else tells me to do it, or it's forbidden because somebody else. I want to figure this out myself. And I think what I realized from the Kushner piece and kind of a companion thought that Arnie Eisen wrote about in a book called The Sovereign Self is that we like making our own decisions. And this last point about streaming is exactly on point, which is, the governor's orders came down, the health authorities came down mid-March, lockdown, okay? It never dawned on me for a second, not even for a nanosecond, to pick up the phone and call some rabbi in New York to say, can we stream, right? And if that position paper had said you cannot stream, and by the way, David Galinkin, who's a respected halachic authority in Israel, is a Masorti rabbi, wrote a piece saying we shouldn't stream. It's actually not halacha. That the halacha is 10 people in one room, and if you're an 11th person, online, then that is okay. But you have to have 10 people in one room, otherwise you can't say Kaddish. And that's a position of different, synagogues throughout the country. I just want nothing could be less interesting to me. Not only less binding, but nothing would be less interesting to me. So the very notion of halakha is I got to do what they say. I got to do what texts say. And I don't want to do that. I'll just end with one story that is just so evocative. This is like the genesis story for me on this issue, which is the late Rabbi Harold Schulweis said to Joel Roth. Joel Roth is a teacher at the seminary. I think he's retiring this year. He was my teacher. I love the guy. Love the guy. He's very halachic, but I'm not, but I love the guy. And Joel Roth wrote the teshuvah that allows Michelle to be a rabbi, right? He is the founding writer of Women Can Be Rabbis, and in the conservative movement. And Harold Schulweis says to Joel Roth, I hate your teshuvah. And Roth says, I don't understand. Don't you support women being rabbis? And Rabbi Schulweis says, of course I do. So then why do you hate my teshuvah? Permits women to be rabbis. I hate your teshuvah because the way you got to that conclusion was you read a bunch of precedents and you read a bunch of sources and you lined them up. And you said, the way I read these sources means women can be rabbis. And Joel Roth said, exactly, that's what I did. And Schulweis says, that's why I hate it. Because you came to conclusions based on sources and precedents. What if you had read the sources and precedents and they had come to the conclusion, as you read them honestly, women cannot be rabbis? Then Roth said, then I would have said women cannot be rabbis. That's the source of that's the conclusion of the sources. And Schulweis said, aha, that's why I hate it. It's just obvious. It is just obvious that women need to be rabbis. It's just obvious that it's morally appropriate for women to be rabbis. So for you to have to rely on sources and precedents leaves me cold. Why don't you just rely on the obvious morality of the situation? To which Rabbi Roth said, who died and made you a prophet? You know, prophets are not, here we're a source-based religion. So in that divide, I'm squarely with Schulweis. I want to be able to make the decisions. I don't want sources and precedents.
Can I ask a question, Liz?
Yeah.
You wanted to ask first?
Oh, I was just going to make a comment, and then your question. My comment was that it's...
You always, you know, there are many times that on your sermons that are memorable. And one phrase that, I don't know, years ago you said something about, I don't recall exactly, you can correct me, it's doing the right thing when nobody's looking.
Yes.
Something like that, you said.
Character is doing the right thing when nobody's looking.
So you are driving, I'm asking you a question. You are driving, and you are in lovely Newton, there are no cars, and you see a stop sign, okay? What do?
Stop.
Stop, okay. So there is no danger that any cars would come. Or any pedestrians. Why do you stop?
Because it's a stop sign.
Okay, but why? Because there are a set of rules that were, you know, you follow the rules.
Right.
All right? And the rules mean you stop, and if you don't stop, you get a fine.
Right.
All right? But wait, let me get there.
Yeah.
And so that means you are complying and you're binding to a set of, you know, set of rules. Why is that different to the rules of a movement?
Well, let me ask you this question, Ken. Let's imagine that the movement said, you know, this whole musical instrumental thing doesn't work for us, halachically, because maybe there's going to be a technical problem and somebody's going to have to get up in the middle of the service, for example. And there's the whole halacha category called Shema Yitafein, lest you have to fix. We just saw a version of that about 11 minutes ago, right? And let's say a band of rabbis came to 385 Ward Street at Shabbat Alive, and they see your iPad, with which you control every sound, and they say that
nobody knew about it.
Yes, everybody knows about it because it's right there, and you do it before Hesha, like her. You know, you do it in public. Right? And they said, you know what? That's not halachic. And they said, we don't want you to do it. Go back to a cappella, the way Jews have been singing for 2,000 years. What would you do?
I'll be miserable and probably leave.
And leave?
Leave the temple.
Okay, so...
And go to Reform movement.
Okay,
so wait, can I make my comment?
So what's your point?
My point is that we're all sovereign selves. We're all sovereign selves. You know it's just right to be able to do instrumental music. In the same way that we all knew, our whole community knew it was just right to stream, right? That when in a pandemic, we want people to be connected. In a pandemic, we want people to go to say Kaddish for their beloved departed. I don't need a source for that. I don't need a precedent for that. And by the way, I'm not interested in your sources and precedents. We're live streaming. Like, go. And in the same way that you would not take no for an answer when it comes to instrumental music, you're a sovereign self just like me.
But there's a principle that was at play, and I can say this because publicly I was very much against live streaming on Shabbat for halachic reasons, all the way up until the pandemic.
Right.
And then we applied an actual halachic concept, which I was 1,000% grateful to have lost that battle, right? Because we were able to transition just like that. But the principle that we applied was sha'at dechak, which means this is a different time out of space that demands of us adaptive response. And that means that we actually have to use Eliza's vision of taking the tradition that our ancestors gave us, which means davening matters, which means community matters, which means connection matters, and use the tools that are available to us to do that. But you know what? There's a cost to that. There is a cost to that. Screens are no longer something any of us can say we don't do on Shabbos.
Oh, absolutely. And when the pandemic is over.
And we won't be able to say we don't do screens on Shabbos.
Screens are coming with.
Right.
Screens coming with.
So I think
that's a future conversation, but that's right. Okay, so now I want to come back to you, Eliza, and then go around, which is, I mean, it's hard to argue.
Why did you unplug the speaker?
No, it's hard.
Wait, nobody saw that. It's under the camera.
It's hard to argue that we want to be in a dialogue with conversation, but here's my question.
Yeah.
Who gets the last vote? Who gets to decide what you do? Yeah. And I want to ask you about, does your dialogue with Jewish tradition, as you framed it, ever have consequences that you do stuff you don't want to do, or you don't do stuff you really want to do?
Yeah, so I'd like to share with you the story of my honeymoon. And I wondered whether, should I share this or not, but I think it's actually, like, there are places that I become very fundamentalist in my approach to how I see myself as being commanded, and there are places that I feel more in dialogue and more flexibility. For whatever reason, kashrut feels super important to me, to an extent that I'm allergic to gluten and dairy, and I know that when I eat gluten and dairy, I will physically get sick. It's tried and true for my whole life. It is guaranteed if I eat those things, I will be sick. I also know that I can eat meat without getting sick. And I grew up eating non-kosher meat and was not sick from it all of my life until I started keeping kosher. And in college, I had a moment. I remember I was in a sushi restaurant and they served me like a platter of sushi, and there was a shrimp on the, like a shrimp sushi on the plate. And I looked at that shrimp sushi and I just knew I couldn't eat it. And it wasn't like I'd not thought about it. It wasn't a logical decision. It was just like the shrimp was looking at me and I was looking at the shrimp and I couldn't do it. And that was it. And so I'm in this very interesting place. So we're on our honeymoon. We're on a safari in Tanzania. And vegetarianism, at least where we were, was not a thing. Like, it did not make any sense to anyone. And the safari that we were on brought food, and they were supposed to bring, like, we arranged in advance, like, vegetarian food. And because vegetarianism is not really a thing there, the thing that they had brought as a vegetarian meal was just like a whole bunch of wheat flour bun things, like a muffin and like a chip, of all these things that would make me sick. So I had a choice of chicken, which I knew would not make me physically sick, or gluten, which I knew would make me physically sick but not spiritually sick. And I chose the gluten, not the chicken, which made no sense and made all my parents and Solomon were like, this is a really dumb, you're in a foreign country with all these foreign bugs, like, you are putting yourself at risk. And for me, it was like, this is the only choice. It's not logical, it's not good. But there I was making a choice that...
And that is one of the things that Kushner says, that it's easy to go to a kosher restaurant because you can eat everything. But if you go to a non-kosher restaurant, you have to be mindful, and it's an opportunity for you to connect with yourself, saying, I cannot eat that.
Right, breakfast, lunch, and supper become occasions for mindful eating rather than simply
You see, I did my homework.
Right, some time ago, my wife and I had lunch in a kosher delicatessen where we could eat anything on the menu. Later that day, had dinner at a non-kosher restaurant where we ordered salad and broiled fish and passed on the soup when we learned that it had been made with chicken stock. We were more conscious of being observant kosher Jews in the restaurant than in the deli because it demanded mindfulness of us when it came to ordering. So so that's a very concrete example. Dan, when has it ever happened that Jewish law forces you to do something you don't want to do, or do something or you can't do what you want to do?
The answer is the second, which is that there are many, many times, like this time of year, when Shabbat is over at 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, and then you have like these 8 hours in Shabbat afternoon. I mean, I would love to go on a drive, to go see a movie, maybe those kind of things, and I just don't. So, and it has its consequences by not doing things on Shabbat. That's one example. And also, the food thing is also really interesting. Also, I agree with that it does get complex when there are many, many times that I would have loved to have tried something, and I just remember like when you think about when you're in college and experimenting, and one of the things I thought, well, maybe I'll just try to, I'll try the lobster, I'll try the trafe, steak or whatever, and I actually at one point said I was going to do that, and I sat down and I said, nope, not going to do it, not going to do it. So it's so there are times that the halacha has never made me do anything that I don't want to do, but it's certainly, I think in some ways, limited some opportunities that are available, especially in the freedom of living in America in the 20th and 21st century.
Michelle, now that you have gone native, does your sense of dialogue with Jewish law, tradition, halacha, etc., as a nativist here at Temple Manuel, do you ever do stuff you don't want to do, or don't do stuff you do want to do because of Judaism?
So yes, halacha is, for me, as I said, it's my appendix. I still very much struggle with that, and I struggle with going native. There are certain things that I can't bring myself to do, including, one of the things that I would love to do. We have 2 children in Jewish day schools and 2 children in public school, and for years I was very holier than thou about the way one should be with your children if they want to do sports on Shabbat. You should just, or a recital or something, you should just say no.
Or Halloween.
Right, or Halloween, or any of those activities that are so part of our culture. You should just say no, because halakha says you say no, so you say no when you're the parent, right? And now I'm the parent.
I remember those days.
And you're saying yes to that.
And it's challenging every time. I'm saying, and there are some ways in which I sometimes say yes to my children doing it, but then I don't participate, and there's a cost to that, because what could be or should be a family endeavor is now something that is to the side of where we are and how we are. And what I'll say about the whole halachic endeavor is that Kushner has it entirely correct in that when you eat at the kosher restaurant, it's easy. When your life is all Jewish day school or all, Jewish camps and Jewish communities that are observant and everybody's doing, Shachris, Mincha, Mariv, it's easy to be a Jew. That's why we live in these small communities that connect us and lift us up. When we go to the individual, it's really challenging, right? How do we determine what our communal norms are and how we observe and who we observe? The first Shabbos birthday party that we were invited to when I was a young parent came from the Temple Emmanuel Nursery School community. On Shabbos, right? And Carol Mursky came down and said, no, we don't do birthday parties on Shabbos, right? How do we set community norms without the halachic system? And that's really our biggest challenge, because observance is determined by a group that agrees to what that observance is, and how we support each other in those observances really matter.
Thank you, Michelle. Elias, last word on, does your relationship to halacha or not cause you to act differently than you would want to act?
Yes, I can give you many examples. One is also the problem that both of you mentioned. Saturday nights, now in the summer, we have a family tradition which is eat sushi, and waiting until 9:30 in the summer days is really problematic for us. So it's a
And,
serious challenge.
And
I
what's
would go
open these days, too?
I would go at 7 and buy the stuff, but I have to wait. But, many of my friends, I love all kinds of music, among them rock music and rock bands. And many times, my friends go on a Friday night to a concert at Gillette or anywhere else. And I don't do it, and I would love to do it. But there is something inside me that says I cannot do it. Even if the time allows me to go, I wouldn't go.
Interesting. Okay, well, guys, thank you. I want to just kind of bring this to a point and figure out what is the relationship between Micah and Kushner, between do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God, and your relationship to Jewish law and tradition and halacha, etc. So we talked about Heschel's formulation of right and right, that the rituals should inspire us to do the ethical, right? R-I-T-E should inspire us to do R-I-G-H-T. And what I love about the Kushner piece, and I'll just close with this, and this is one of the key pieces of my adult life, is he takes out the word obligation. And I don't like obligation. It's just not very motivating. To say you are obligated to do something, Americans who are sovereign selves resist that. And he converts it to opportunity. That the ritual is an opportunity to add meaning, purpose, and joy to your life. And I myself am never in conflict between what I want to do and what I do. Never in conflict. Judaism never forces me to do anything. The only things I do are things I want to do because it's an opportunity to add meaning, purpose, and joy to my life. It takes all the friction, all the conflict. I don't have the Gillette on Friday night problem. I don't like to leave Newton anyway. I just, whatever it is I want to do, and I'll just give you an example about it, which is something, and close with this. So it's an opportunity to add meaning, purpose, and joy and strength. I think about, we've been here all different numbers of years, 23, 21, 30, whatever, 4, 11, 12. If you look at all of us except for Dan, we're never regular evening Ma'ariv people. I mean, I did it when I was saying Kaddish, and I continued after I said Kaddish, but before Kaddish I didn't. And now we all do it every night. And I just find that is getting me through the pandemic. Our evening traditions, coming here together, hearing you guys sing, davening together, saying Kaddish, being with our virtual community. I don't do it out of obligation. And I don't do it because it's a job. I do it because it's an opportunity for meaning, purpose, and joy. And it makes me a better version of me. I think that's what Judaism does. It makes us a better version of us. Elias, do you have a Micah song?
Yes. So Michelle loves this song. It comes from Micah 4, chapter 4, and a beautiful message, just to end with a high note. And they shall sit under your vineyard. How do you say that? Vineyard. Everyone under the fig tree, and none shall be afraid.
Which Hamilton did really well, this verse.
Yes. It goes like this. וישבו איש תחת גפנו בתחת עינתו וישבו איש תחת גפנו בתחת עינתו אבן מחריד ואין מקריד, ואין מקריד, ואין מחריד, וישבו איש תחת גפנו, ותחת עינתו, וישבו איש תחת גפנו, ותחת עינתו. Shabbat Shalom.
Yay, thank you. Shabbat Shalom. Hey, best news, you are all required, halachically obligated to tune in 12 minutes for our service that starts at 9:30. Thus says the Lord the Commander. See you at 9:30.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.